It is possible to find really good options well under the typical audiophile price tags. The DT880 and DT770, Sony MDR MA100, Rode NTH100, and Audio-Technica ATH-SR50 are all great headphones and well within reach of a lot of people. Today, we are going to take a look at the Audio-Technica ATH-SR50, a $150 headphone that strangely has not received much attention. There's a strong resemblance to the bigger brother MSR7B, but is the SR50 a cheaper twin? Let's find out. Audio-Technica has discontinued the SR50, but this headphone is still pretty easy to find. The company says that the SR50 is a, quote, high-resolution headphone. They promise that the SR50 will reproduce music, quote, in all its high-fidelity glory. Supposedly, the SR50 will render superior audio clarity because of the air damping technology. And that's it. This is the extent of Audio-Technica's marketing. I have seen marketing that is simple, or clearly exaggerated, or entirely technical, or quite vague, but this is the first time I have seen marketing that is, well, terribly uninteresting. No real promises here, and certainly no idea what to expect. The SR50 is a sleek black headphone. It is made primarily of plastic and some metal substructure. The ear cups, yoke, and headband are plastic. However, the headband adjustment has metal for support. The plastic feels no worse than what we find on the much more expensive audeze LCD-1. The ear cups swivel to lay flat, and they also fold into the headband. The ear pads and headband are made of memory foam. They are soft and plush. The ear pads, thankfully, are not proprietary. You can easily find third-party alternatives. The SR50 comes with a pleather carrying pouch and 2 cables. And here's a surprise, the SR50 is wired for balanced connection. And you get 2 cables. One is for single-ended use and the second is for balanced. The balanced cable ends at a 4.4mm terminator. Both cables are well made, transmit very little microphonics, and are about 4 feet long. Sadly, we do not get spare ear pads. As for comfort, look, you have to put these on your head to really feel how plush and comfy they are. The ear cups seal around my ears, and the clamping force is a bit less than that of the HD6XX. The SR50 does not do a particularly good job of isolating outside noise. I could easily wear this headphone for long periods and had no trouble keeping them on for about 4 hours at a time. Overall, the SR50 is well made. It has good accessories, though the lack of spare ear pads is a little bit annoying. This headphone is, I think, very comfortable. I tested the SR50 using my RME ADI2 DAC, Low2 PAW 6000, Eco Zerta ITM03, and the Matrix Audio Mini I Pro 3. I used the stock accessories. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. The SR50 is easy to drive. You do not need a powerful amp, and any DAP with a balanced output will work great with the SR50, but you really can run this off of single-ended. My tests indicate that the SR50 has a marginal sub-bass roll-off and a more close to neutral mid-bass. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, there's a rumble from the beginning, which builds into a crescendo. The SR50 presented this detail. The rumble was a little bit quieter than what I heard on the neutral Audeze 4X. Transients was faster on the SR50. When the crescendo hit, the SR50 kept the organ separate from the other instruments. The rolling thunder effect was audible, but it did not drown out the other elements. When the vocals chimed in, they rose from the background until they were just about shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. In Conquered by Overwork, there's a rolling marble sound at the beginning. This pans from right to left to center. The SR50 presented this sound and the panning. There are multiple drums in this track, and the SR50 rendered them all clearly. The various drums all had hard impact, similar to what I heard on the S4X. I listened to several hip-hop songs, including Pure Water, Youp Attack, Reel It In, and Uproar. On each occasion, the SR50 presented the sub-bass but slightly de-emphasized it. The subwoofer always sounded like it was at the other end of a medium-sized room. The vocals were about 1 step ahead of the instruments and retained their sparkle. The drums were a little louder than the sub-bass. I listened to my Sicario playlist. I used these tracks to determine if there's any audible bass distortion. Traversing from low to high volumes, I could not hear any distortion. Overall, the SR50 appears to have a marginal sub-bass roll-off that can be corrected with cautious application of EQ. Mid-bass is closer to neutral. My tests indicate that the SR50 has slightly forward mids. In Orla Gartland's Why Am I Like This, there's natural vocal grain and sibilance mixed into the track. The SR50 presented and emphasized the sibilance very marginally, and it sounded similar to the emphasis that the S4X gives. The more neutral Avantone planar is a bit less sibilance in comparison. Orla's voice was 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments. The drums were the most obvious instruments in the mix, but did not drown out those other elements. There was some melding among all instruments. In Watch It Back by Haim, the SR50 again showed that it slightly emphasized vocal sibilance. This was similar to what I heard on the audeze 4X. At 8 seconds into the track, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The SR50 rendered this detail. There are 2 backup vocalists, one in either channel. The SR50 initially presented all 3 vocalists clearly with their individual tonalities. However, when the instruments played at maximum, the backup vocalists melded into one voice. The drums, bass, guitar, and piano all melded slightly. The drums generally were louder than these rest. The vocals remained 1 to 2 steps ahead of the other elements. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the SR50 presented the ukulele, drums, and bass, but the drums were a little bit louder than the others. All instruments melded their tonalities together marginally. The primary male vocalist was 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments. His vocal sibilance was not emphasized. There's a backup vocalist whose voice is layered beneath the primaries. Most headphones cannot reveal this subtle detail, and the SR50 could not either. Between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds, there are sharp intakes of breaths. The SR50 presented this detail. Overall, the SR50 has marginally forward mids, but seems fairly close to neutral in this regard. There's about average clarity in this region. My tests indicate that the SR50 has a slight lower to mid treble reduction and a close to neutral upper treble. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the SR50 presented the brass and horns clearly. Their nasally signatures were audible. However, the higher pitch notes seemed a bit recessed, less loud than what I heard on the more neutral Avantone planar. The timpani was clear, but it did not drown out the other instruments. The SR50 has some width and depth, but no verticality. In other words, some instruments seemed further out into the wings, some sounded like they were deeper into the room, but no sounds came from above or below. In Flight from the City, the SR50 made the piano sound like it was about 6 feet away. Each bass note seemed a little bit recessed with faster transients than what I heard on the audeze 4X. The cello was as loud as the piano and sounded, for the lack of better terminology, smooth. I heard the pops and sizzles, electric buzzing effects, creaking of wood on the pianist's bench, and the shifting of the cello's weight. In Take 5 by the De Brubeck Quartet, the SR50 rendered the piano in the right, drums in the left, saxophone center, and bass 1 step behind. All instruments were easy to hear and none seemed veiled in the mix. The saxophone was the loudest, most forward instrument in the group set. The saxophone's higher pitched notes were quieter, less energetic than what I heard on the Avantone planar and the audeze 4X. The cymbals are struck at different positions, which should result in varying tonalities. However, the SR50 made each cymbal strike sound the same. Overall, the SR50 seems to have a low to mid treble reduction and a close to neutral upper treble. Nothing ever sounded harsh or piercing, even at high volumes. As I said at the beginning of this video, Audio-Technica gives little to no information about what to expect regarding this headphone, and this includes detail retrieval. I had no preconceptions about the SR50's detailability, but was a bit surprised to find abundant clarity in some respects. This headphone will easily reveal obvious details, but does not seem to cater to subtle or nuanced ones. Layered details never popped out of the background as they would on analytical headphones. But on the other hand, the SR50 never made instruments sound muddy or veiled, and I always clearly heard vocalists in a mix. Creaking of wood, shifting of a cello's weight, sharp intakes of breaths, multiple vocalists, twangs of guitar strings, nasally signatures of brass and horns, these types of details are clear. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of steps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Sennheiser HD800S presents 22 footsteps, the Focal Clear, 18. The Austrian Audio HiX65 presents 16 to 17 footsteps. The HiX55 presents 16. The HiX15 and X25BT present 13 to 14. The hifi Mansandara, Aventone Planar, Sivka Phoenix, and Birdynamic DT1990 each present 10 to 11 footsteps. The Monolith M1070, M1570, Sivka Robin, and Ultrasone Pro 1480i all provide 8 to 9. The audeze LCD2 Closed and LCD2 Classic bring 7 to 8. The older M1060C provides 7 footsteps. The audeze LCD1 and HD6XX present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH20 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. And the SR50 rendered 8 footsteps. On my scale of detail retrieval, the HD6XX and LCD1 are the average performers. Any headphones that provide more or less detail are judged accordingly. So the NDH20 would be considered as below average and the hifi Mansandara as above average. Here, based on this scale, I think the SR50 has slightly above average detail retrieval. Some people want narrow soundstage, some want as wide as possible, and many people have a hard time conceptualizing soundstage. Unfortunately, the only way to know how much soundstage a headphone exhibits is really to compare it. Soundstage has a lot to do with the tuning of the headphone, the original recording methodology, and to some degree, the earpads, placement of your headphones on your head, and of course, whether the headphone drivers are getting sufficient power for peak performance. Here, the SR50 does not present wide soundstage, at least not in the typical sense. If you come from Beats or Bose headphones, then yes, you could say that the SR50 is wide sounding. But compare it to other audiophile headphones, and the experience is a little bit different. I have a soundstage scale. Again, I use the HD6XX and LCD1 as my average performers. Headphones that have more or less soundstage than these two are judged accordingly. The audeze Mobius and all Beats headphones have claustrophobic soundstage. The NDH20 and ATH-M60X have below average soundstage. The HD6XX and LCD1 have average soundstage. The Sivka Phoenix, Emotiva GR1, and Ultrasone Pro 1480i have average to maybe above average soundstage. The hifi Mansandara, Aventone Planar, Austrian Audio HiX55 and X65, and the LCD2 Classic have above average soundstage. The hifi Mandiva has wide soundstage. The HD800S has super wide soundstage. In my opinion, the SR50 has soundstage similar to the HD6XX and LCD1. Looks can be deceptive. Prior experience with a company can also be a little bit misleading. A headphone that looks gorgeous might sound like hot garbage, and a piece of junk headphone could provide a sublime listening experience. Just because a company has made headphones with a particular sound signature does not mean that they are not willing to experiment in the future. When I looked at the SR50, I wasn't quite sure what to expect. I could not find a frequency response graph. Audio-Technica gave no information. So my presumption was that either the SR50 had a bassy sound or a very V-shaped tuning. I was a bit surprised to find neither to be the case. The SR50, in my opinion, has a more or less balanced sound signature. The sub-bass has a marginal roll-off. This can be corrected with careful use of EQ. Mid-bass seems closer to neutral. Transience is a little bit faster than what you might hear on more neutral headphones. Clarity in this region is at least average. The mids are slightly forward. There's a marginal emphasis of female vocal sibilants, and it reminds me of the emphasis that the Allo S4X exhibits. Vocals stand 1 to 2 steps ahead of instruments. While instruments do tend to meld notes somewhat, nothing sounds veiled or muddy. The treble is a little bit odd. There seems to be a reduction in the low to mid treble and a closer to neutral upper treble. The result in my experience is that the SR50 never sounds harsh. The SR50 has slightly above average detail retrieval, but average soundstage. Vocals pop in a mix. Drums have hard but not piercing impact. Treble is pretty easy, or at least not emphasized. Maybe this is the type of sound signature you are looking for, or perhaps you're after something completely different. Only you can decide. We have to conduct comparisons to figure out where products stand. With the constant hype behind products, we need to gather as much concrete info as possible. Here, we are going to compare the SR50 against the MSR7B, AKG K371, and the audeze LCD1. For these tests, I used the stock accessories. I plugged each headphone into a passive AB switch that was connected to my Army ATH-2 DAC. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD, and I tried to volume match. The ATH-SR7B and SR50 have similar bass response. Both have a sub-bass roll-off. The SR50 overall is a bit closer to neutral in this regard. Both headphones have fast bass transients, nearly identical bass clarity. Separation of mid-bass from sub-bass is also very similar, with an edge going towards the ATH-SR7B. The mids are different. Both have forward mids, with vocals being the focus, but the ATH-SR7B has greater emphasis of vocal sibilance for both male and female artists. Separation and clarity in this region is more obvious on the ATH-SR7B. The treble is also different. The SR50 has low to mid treble reduction and a closer to neutral upper treble. The ATH-SR7B has a treble emphasis starting around the mid treble region. The ATH-SR7B has a bit more clarity in the treble area. The ATH-SR7B has greater detail retrieval. In my new light test, it rendered 12 footsteps. The headphones exhibit similar soundstage. The K371 has a very different bass response compared to the SR50. The 371 has an emphasis throughout this region. The SR50 has noticeably greater separation of sub-bass from mid-bass and faster transients. The 371 has more bass bleed into the mids. And the mids are different. The SR50 has forward mids with vocals standing apart from instruments. The 371 in comparison has more recessed mids. Vocals stand closer to instruments on the 371. Both headphones have similar sibilance emphasis. The treble is also a little bit different. The SR50 has a slight low to mid treble reduction and a more neutral upper treble. The 371 has closer to neutral low to mid treble compared to the SR50, but the 371 also has a slight emphasis of the upper treble. Clarity in this region is somewhat similar. The SR50 has greater clarity and detail retrieval overall. In my new light test, the 371 rendered 5 to 6 footsteps. The SR50 also has wider soundstage than the 371. The LCD1 has a greater sub-bass roll-off than the SR50. Transients is marginally faster on the LCD1. Separation of sub-bass from mid-bass is slightly more apparent on the LCD1. Overall clarity in this region, however, is similar. Both the LCD1 and SR50 have forward mids. The LCD1 emphasizes sibilance and vocal grain, while the SR50 appears to emphasize only sibilance in comparison. The LCD1 has a greater sibilance push than the SR50. Separation of mid-centric instruments is a bit more obvious on the SR50. Vocals stand closer to the ears on the LCD1. Treble is a bit different. The LCD1 has a marginal emphasis starting in the mid-treble region. The SR50 has a low to mid-treble reduction and a more neutral rendition of upper treble. Clarity in this region is similar. The SR50 has a bit more detail and clarity. Both the SR50 and LCD1 have similar soundstage. Hopefully comparisons like these help put things into perspective. All four headphones are different, and it would be rather odd to confuse one's sound signature for any other in this group. You have plenty of options in the market, and it may be that all, one, or none of these headphones I mentioned might be to your liking. Frankly, I have no idea how long the SR50 was actually in the market before Audio-Technica decided to abort it, but you can still find it without much difficulty. I'm a bit surprised that Audio-Technica won't revive this headphone. Okay, so maybe I'm jumping the gun. Yes, I think that the SR50 is value, no doubt about it. Now I can say that I'm surprised that Audio-Technica killed it. For about $150, you get plenty to whet your appetite. The build is comparable to that of the more expensive MSR7B. The SR50 is quite comfortable for long listening sessions, at least for me. You get two perfectly good cables, and one of them is balanced, in case you have a portable audio player that outputs balanced. The SR50 does not, however, have the same or similar sound signature as the MSR7B, so you can't buy the former thinking that you're getting the same thing as the latter. When you compare these more affordable headphones against the often overhyped competitors, such as the LCD1 or the NDH20, you get a dose of reality. The truth is that when you pay more, you don't necessarily get more. Paying triple or quintuple the cost of the SR50 does not guarantee triple or quintuple detail, soundstage, clarity, or comfort. Of course, you'll get a different sound signature, and that might be a reason to spend more. As far as the SR50 goes, there's nothing about this headphone which makes me think that Audio-Technica should have yanked it off the manufacturing floor. Ultimately, I think that the SR50 is a fine addition to the audiophile landscape.